Thank you. Could I please ask our guests who are leaving the chamber in the gallery, who have been most welcome to attend our Parliament, your Parliament, to do so quickly and quietly, because in fact we're about to go into the next item of business and we need some quiet for that. Thank you very much for your cooperation. So, in fact, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19510 in the name of Jackson Carlisle on Glasgow City Council's plans for an at-city boundary congestion charge and a toll on using the Clyde Tunnel. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jackson Carlisle to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank those members who have been generous enough to lend their support to my motion today, and can I say how delighted I am to see Fiona Hislop in her chair to respond to it today, because I hope this will give her the opportunity for redemption, to redeem herself after the casual way she brushed aside my inquiry, which is the direct reason why this debate has been tabled today. When I asked her about this just a few weeks ago, and she said, I think, words to the effect that the Tories are in favour of localism, this was nothing to do with her, and washed her hands of the whole affair. And I hope that's not going to be her attitude today. Well, in some ways, maybe I should hope that will be her attitude today, because it has so offended all of my constituents in Eastwood that it's done wonders for my re-election prospects next May. And I don't know, maybe that was her intention. And if it was, well, of course I will be eternally grateful. But I would far rather she called out the reckless disregard for the damage that her colleagues in SNP-led Glasgow City Council could be wreaking upon the public by pursuing this policy, and also that she will give proper consideration to the wider long-term consequences that may follow as a result of this action were other councils to follow suit. Because what Glasgow have proposed is not, as some people have now got used to, a charge for LEZ, for heavy fuel inefficient vehicles. They are talking about an at-city boundary congestion charge. They are asking constituents, not just from my local authority, but from all the neighbouring local authorities, to flash their digital passports as they seek to cross the city boundary into Glasgow. Those people who are attending healthcare appointments at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, those people who are going to work in the city, those people who are hoping to bring some sort of income into the city, and in my case, those people who are crossing the road, potentially, or just up the street to get to Sainsbury's, to get their shop, will now have to pay a boundary charge for the privilege of having done so. People in East Renfrewshire, in Renfrewshire, in Western Bartonshire, in North Lanarkshire and in South Lanarkshire are those who are most likely to be the those who are heaviest impacted. However, the charge would apply to every person in Scotland, every person who does not live in Glasgow when they cross the council boundary, i.e. a driver who is resident in the Borders or Dumfries and Galloway councils would be charged for entering Glasgow when they crossed into the city from one of the neighbouring local authorities. Drivers who are resident in one of the other 31 local authorities would be charged for every car journey to Glasgow, including for work, as I said, for healthcare, as I said, for education or for social and family reasons, while Glasgow residents would be exempt. Presiding Officer, what have people had to say about this prospective charge? The Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce has said we cannot support a citywide congestion charge, particularly until improvements in public transport have been made, which was his reason for objecting it. But also we are concerned about the possible displacement of business out of Glasgow. West of Scotland Development Manager for the Federation of Small Businesses said we would urge extreme caution when it comes to introducing tolls, in addition to the congestion charge, the proposed charge for people who use the Clyde Tunnel. Again, many of whom are using it to get to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital to attend urgent appointments. I remember when this hospital was chosen by Nicola Sturgeon, or confirmed by Nicola Sturgeon over a decision by Malcolm Chisholm in a previous Parliament. Concerns were expressed by people who lived in East Renfrewshire who could easily access the Victoria Hospital, that accessing the Queen Elizabeth Hospital was a much harder journey to undertake by public transport, and even to this day that remains the case, and many of them therefore have to do so by using their car. They will all be charged. Those coming across from the north of the city will be charged for getting to hospital. That surely is the antithesis of what I thought the SNP came into office with their proudest boast in the first Parliament, which was abolishing tolls. We abolished the tolls on the bridge across the Skye. They were bursting with enthusiasm for the fact they'd abolished tolls. And here we are, full circle, with the SNP administration in Glasgow, with Fiona Hislop washing her hands of it, despite Section 51 of the Act, which she could enforce, which says it can only take place with her express permission. Presiding Officer, Labour MPs, I'm pleased to say, have been supportive of this. Even SNP MSPs have endorsed the motion. I'm not surprised. I can see Mr Harvey probably glowering at me, as he usually does. I mean, Ross Greer, being the only West of Scotland MSP totally unconcerned for the well-being of the West of Scotland region in this instance, who will no doubt think this is a wonderful thing. It's not a wonderful thing. It is potentially a devastating and damaging additional charge on my constituents, a devastating and damaging experience for businesses all across the city, potentially undermining the well-being and health care of my constituents and those in the neighbouring local authorities. And so I ask the Cabinet Secretary not to brush over it on this occasion, or if she's going to do some nice choice words that I can use in my election literature, because I've no doubt it will assist, but to ask her to consider seriously whether the long-term implications of all other local authorities following suit would not be one of national concern. Were somebody from here today to travel up to Aberdeen, paying a boundary charge through every council area that they went past for the privilege, staying overnight, and then paying a boundary charge for every local authority they came back through on the way down, the consequence of this would be a ridiculously complicated and inconsequential burden on motorists all across Scotland, damaging the Scottish economy, damaging the tourist infrastructure across the city. And I don't know if I've got time, unfortunately, because I'm coming to the end of my 7 minutes, Mr Sweeney, and I hope you're going to repent as well, because I've been very concerned by your kind of tacit support for these matters, but no doubt you will intervene in your own speech to say so. But I would ask the Cabinet Secretary seriously. There is an opportunity. I understand the issues about funding local services and all of that. But this is, I think, a deeply damaging proposal, which, if extended, could have fundamentally damaging consequences for the whole of Scotland, for the Scottish economy, and for the healthcare and well-being of our constituents. Please say no.
Thank you, Mr Carlaw. Before we move to the open debate, I would advise members that obviously there's a lot of interest in this debate. We are, of course, very tight for time because we will be resuming other business at 2 p.m. This afternoon, and we need to allow the parliamentary staff sufficient time to be able to clear the chamber between the two sittings, and therefore members must stick to the time that they have agreed to, which is up to 4 minutes. With that, I call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Pam Gozo.
Thank you, President. I could see you looking very clearly at me when you were reminding members of the 4-minute limit. Can I thank Jackson Carlaw for bringing forward his motion this afternoon, a motion I actually have some sympathy with. I double-checked just before the debate. It was remiss of me I hadn't signed his motion. I can let him know I have now altered that and I have added my name to his motion. I do have concerns about the proposals that his motion touches on. I think, though, it is only fair to recognise, and I do set it in its context, there are, I think we would all agree, challenges of congestion in the city of Glasgow. To be fair, I've more often than not noticed it when I'm contributing to issues of congestion in the city of Glasgow. There are obviously issues around emissions in Glasgow, though I would observe, I think the emissions, the LEZ has actually worked quite well, and we should reflect on that. And I do think there are other means to try and tackle some of the issues around congestion. I'll try and return to that within the 4 minutes I have been allocated. I also think, and I do think it is fair that we should recognise, Glasgow does have a responsibility for maintaining many of the crown jewels that I think we are all proud of that we have in this country. The Kelvin Grove Art Galleries and Museum, People's Palace, tremendous assets, not just for the city of Glasgow, but for Scotland as a whole. I'm very proud to represent Cumbernauld and Kilsyth, but I'm also a very proud Glaswegian. I grew up in the city of Glasgow, and I certainly recognise the importance of these assets to the city and the country as a whole. It's probably too big a subject to linger on too much in the context of this debate. I happen to notice Mr Sweeney, who I look forward to hearing from in a few months, laid a motion before Parliament around the restoration of a well at Glasgow Cathedral. But I was taken with a point he made in his motion about the emergence of the metropolitan city of Glasgow. And I would reflect, of course, we've got the city region, we've got the city region cabinet. There is a question whether we really have proper metropolitan governance around the city region. And yeah, it's a much wider debate and probably not one for this. But there's something to be said for us about considering what that might look like in the context of properly resourcing assets across the entire city region. On the proposal, and we should remind ourselves, of course, and I think again it's fair to remind ourselves, this is being explored. There is no firm commitment to it yet. But I do recognise the concerns. I won't reiterate the points that have been made by Jackson Carl in relation to the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce's remarks, but I think his points were well made around accessing public services that people have no choice but to go into Glasgow to access, such as the National Health Service. My constituents, I live in the NHS Lanarkshire area, but because of the historic relationship of Cumbernauld and Kilsyth with other areas, actually more often not people are accessing services in Glasgow, such as at the Royal Infirmary, such as at the Southern General. So I think these are concerns that have to be heard. I have some suggestions about how we can make some improvements around public transport, certainly in my area, which could alleviate some of the congestion. At Croy Railway Station, we have had a historic problem with congestion, that word again, in terms of the car park at Croy Railway Station. That dissipated during COVID-19. It has re-emerged. I'm engaging with ScotRail to see if we can improve capacity there. We need to see improved bus services. Of course, the Transport Scotland Act, which I was very proud to and pleased to vote for in 2019, gives powers to local authorities to improve bus services in the area. I'm pleased that Strathclyde Partnership for Transport are exploring that, and I think that's something that we should welcome. Stagecoach, an operator that serves my area, has talked about exploring the use of hard shoulder running between my area and Glasgow on M80. And again, I think that's something that we should explore. So I think there are other issues that there are other means by which we can look at this issue, and I think that's something that should be done. And again, I thank Jackson Carl for bringing forward this debate.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. I call Pam Gosell to be followed by Davy Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I begin, I would like to thank my colleague Jackson Carl for bringing this very important topic to the Parliament. This is an issue that not only affects those in Glasgow, but also everyone outside Glasgow, including my area of West of Scotland. SNP-run Glasgow City Council is looking to propose an at-city boundary congestion charge and a toll on those using the Clyde Tunnel, which would result in motorists from other local authority areas being charged each time that they drive into the city. Presiding Officer, people on the ground are not happy with this development. Over the past months, I have knocked on thousands of doors across my area of East Dunbartonshire, with many residents being very concerned. Let's be clear about who this will affect. Those of us travelling into Glasgow for work, for hospital appointments, to check on elderly relatives, to drop off our kids at school, to attend university or college, or simply to enjoy a day out. Any charge for non-residents is seen as an unfair additional tax. Those affected most acutely would be those in low incomes, shift workers, minimum wage workers, and the elderly who rely on their cars to get to these places due to unreliable public transport. That is why I launched a petition calling on Glasgow City Council to ditch the proposal, which has received hundreds of signatures so far. Presiding Officer, why is it that hard-working families and communities will be forced to pick up the bill for the SNP-run Glasgow City Council's financial mismanagement? We often hear about how important free flow and connectivity is for areas to have social and economic growth. However, this is nothing but a money-making scheme that hinders connectivity. And what comes next? Just imagine, Presiding Officer, if all councils started charging like this, why would anybody leave their area? Do we just live in silos? Is this the sort of Scotland that SNP are aiming for? The SNP like to bang on about inclusion and integration, but now they risk creating divisions within Scotland. Yet again, this is another saga in their war against motorists. Like my colleague Jackson Carlos said, I hope that the Cabinet Secretary will use those special powers to intervene and stop this ridiculous development. However, it is not just individuals opposed to this plan, it's also businesses. Local businesses are unhappy at the proposed congestion charge, and so are major wholesalers and cash and carry suppliers based in Glasgow, as any additional costs would in turn be passed on to the customers in my region. This puts local businesses at a disadvantage during an already difficult trading period. Stuart Patrick from the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce said, "We are very concerned about the possible displacement of businesses out of Glasgow and called on the SNP government to do more to improve transport links. Businesses are already suffering by poor decisions taken by the SNP Scottish Government and the UK Labour Government, and the last thing they need is more tax." In closing, I really do not see people paying every single time to drive into Glasgow. I highly doubt that the money raised from this terrible scheme will be enough to make up for the SNP's run Glasgow City Council's financial mess, and those losing out will be families, businesses and communities. I really hope that, in closing, the Cabinet Secretary expresses her opposition to this outrageous proposal.
Thank you. I call Davy Russell to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I must thank Jackson Carlaw for bringing this to the Chamber. I actually chose to speak in this matter because once upon a time, in a not too distant past, I was actually responsible for the Clyde Tunnel and the road network within Glasgow. So it's a wee bit dear to my heart, and I probably know a wee bit more about it than most of the people in here. The Clyde Tunnel, once state-of-the-art technology in the 60s, where it used to get visited with schools. It was like a spaceship inside it. Dignitaries from countries all over the world. You know, it was a real tremendous thing to actually visit. However, it's been a bit neglected over the years. A wee bit of capital investment, but not much. But the Clyde Tunnel was completed and opened in '63 by Queen Elizabeth. Paid for by the former Corporation of Glasgow. That was 63 years ago. So basically the citizens of Glasgow paid for it at that time, which were mums and dads, grannies and grandpas. You know, but I think the SNP have an absolute cheek in trying to introduce charging for the use of something that the people of Glasgow have already paid for on their own. The actual running costs of the Clyde Tunnel are roughly about £1.5 million a year, which is the best value of any tunnel in the UK. It's roughly about 7p per car it costs. Roughly 60,000 vehicles a day use it, and I assume they're only charging £1. That equates to over 20 million. As opposed to the just over £1 million for running it. So it belongs to the citizens of Glasgow. It's actually a super tax on the citizens of Glasgow, and we should be standing against that. At the same time, the Scottish Government abolished this kind of tax in the Erskine, not just now. At the same time, they abolished this kind of tax on Erskine Bridge, the Forth Road Bridge and Skye Road Bridge, yet again showing their contempt for the people of Glasgow because they want to actually introduce a tax on them. But this type of skullduggery is normal for an SNP administration led by Susan Aitken. It was mentioned there about the crown jewels and some iconic buildings. They've actually mortgaged them all. They've hawked a lot of them. so including the city chambers. But if that's not enough, a tax in general on vehicles entering the city boundary applied to all cars or just those based outside is not a viable solution to congestion. This victimises the people of Lanarkshire, Renfrewshire, East Renfrewshire, everybody round about. There are dozens of side roads which cross boundaries round about the centre of the city boundary. So it's going to cost tens of millions to actually implement it, never mind actually run it. So this will This is a penalty, a harsh penalty in common working people. For the majority in the mornings are travelling to or as part of work, and it's an expense that will be absorbed by hard-pressed families, if only because the public transport alternative is not reliable enough or adequate. Ultimately, it will be a quick cash grab, super tax at the expense of businesses, employers and road users in general. This will affect jobs and local businesses where people avoid Glasgow. If the Council would like to increase the use of public transport instead of driving people their cars to the city, then the only route forward is to make public transport more frequent, more reliable, better and faster. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Patrick Harvey to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I congratulate Jackson Carlaw for bringing the motion. I'm genuinely sorry if he thinks I was glowering in any way. It certainly wasn't the intention. It's just my face. If he doesn't like it, I'm sorry, but it's the only one I've got. As for the motion that he's brought, I've got no particular objection to what's actually written in the motion. He makes the point that if a proposal of this kind was taken forward, it would have a wider regional impact, perhaps even a national impact, and it's reasonable for the Parliament as the national forum for debate to discuss it. I've got no objection to that. I have to admit, I did sort of expect a little bit more hyperbole in the speeches, and we were not disappointed with that. There was a little bit of war on motorists rhetoric coming out a couple of times from some of the speeches so far. There are two perspectives through which we can see this issue. One is transport and the other is local government. And I'd like to split them up. On transport, whether the Conservatives agree with this or not, I believe the case is overwhelming for a shift toward lower car use and greater investment in public transport and more availability and affordability of public transport. And instead of vehicle excise duty being the principal means of raising revenue from the use of the roads, we should be shifting towards something closer to a polluter pays principle, whether that's road user charging or some other form. And the UK government has actually been praised. Well, perhaps cautious welcome is the right phrase to use in the budget for taking some baby steps this year toward a polluter pays principle for road use. But even if the UK and Scottish and local government all recognise that some kind of change of this kind has to come in time, I think they all currently lack the courage to say so. If we make such a change, then yes, of course, border and boundary issues are going to have to be addressed. I'm aware that some areas, for example, in Eastern Bartonshire, have a residential road so close to the boundary with Glasgow that entering Glasgow is the only way for a person to leave their own street. So, of course, some of those issues have to be addressed, but these issues are not insurmountable. As for the local government perspective, Glasgow City Council proposals that are under consideration at the moment, I believe, reflect the position of local government generally, a lack of funding and a lack of power. Now, of course, I'm going to make the case that Greens have done more than any other party in recent years to protect local government funding in many years of budget negotiations, and we've successfully made the case for new financial powers for councils as well, some of which are now in place. Is it enough? No. But we're the only party to have made serious progress and to have shown how to fund it fairly from progressive taxation. But the specific issue that Glasgow City Council faces, as we all know, and it's been acknowledged for many years, a great many high-value properties outside the city, generating costs for Glasgow without contributing council tax. This is an historic inequality since the break-up of Strathclyde. And the failure to reform local government taxation is one of the chronic issues that this Parliament has repeatedly refused to resolve. This is what leaves Glasgow City Council forced to consider options which probably wouldn't even be their first preference if they had solutions to those wider issues. Similar to the Clyde Tunnel issues as well. It is nationally important infrastructure, but its specific costs are borne by Glasgow City Council, and that's simply because of the designation of the road rather than the nature of the infrastructure. Comparable bridges are not funded by the local authority. So does anyone, Glasgow City Council, my party or anybody else, think this proposal is a wonderful thing, as I think Jackson Carlaw used the phrase? I don't think anyone does. It is one option for addressing legitimate issues. It's probably not the only option. It may not be the best option. But the challenge to anyone who doesn't like what the City Council are considering at the moment is, if not this, then what? And the answer needs to address questions about local government funding, the inequality facing an urban centre like Glasgow. It also needs to support the transition to a sustainable transport system that reduces road traffic levels, invests in high-quality public transport and meets the needs of people.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. I have indicated the lack of time we have, and I need members' cooperation to allow our staff not to have to rush around like mad people in a very stressful way. That's what I'm trying to avoid. With that, I call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Pam Duncan-Clancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I also take this opportunity to congratulate Jackson Carlaw for bringing this important issue to the Chamber today. But I'm going to be honest, I do believe that this proposal is 100% daft. The SNP-led Scottish Government abolished the last remaining bridge toll back in 2008. But yet, here we are in 2025 with an SNP-led council trying to introduce tolls on the Clyde Tunnel, alongside, as many have mentioned, an in-city boundary charge. You just couldn't make it up, and I have got no idea how the Cabinet Secretary is going to try and square that circle today, because these charges would have a profound impact on constituents right across the central region. South Lanarkshire, North Lanarkshire and even Falkirk are communities. Thousands of people who choose to live there depend on travelling to Glasgow or to Edinburgh for work. And if this idea ever becomes a reality, I know my inbox is going to be full of angry motorists being told that they must pay yet another tax just to get to their jobs. And I think we've got to take a step back just for a second and remember what motorists already fork out for the privilege of owning a car. You've got road tax, insurance, servicing and MOTs, you've got repairs, permits and costly paid parking in certain local authority areas, petrol, diesel and for many monthly payments on the car itself. Now, simply for crossing from one local authority area into another, the local SNP administration want to slap on an additional charge to what motorists already fork out. And to me, that's just not common sense. But I think we've also got to take into account yesterday's budget, because, of course, the Chancellor now wants to tax electric vehicles too. I'm under no illusion why motorists are fed up. It's tax upon cost upon tax. I think, going back to the at-boundary congestion charge, the most ridiculous part of this is that our own public transport network still isn't good enough to give people a genuine alternative. And that's been mentioned by Jamie Hepburn, by Patrick Harvey, by others in the Chamber this afternoon, because it prices people, it's not a genuine alternative, and with the at-boundary congestion charge, it just prices people out of owning a car with no workable solution for how they're supposed to get around. Jackson Carlaw is 100% right with his motion today. Glasgow City Council's plans could trigger a domino effect. If one local authority introduces these charges, others may retaliate. It will become a tit-for-tat spiral, and the only losers will be ordinary, hard-working people who are left to pay the price for it. I'm beyond fed up with those same people being taxed to the hilt to prop up ageing infrastructure and fill gaps in mismanaged budgets. It's not the taxpayer's job to cover for political incompetence, yet that's exactly the pattern we keep seeing from left-wing administrations. So I'd be very interested to hear the Cabinet Secretary's views today. Do they still believe in the abolition of tolls? Or are we quietly expanding new bridge tolls or any infrastructure tolls through the back door? And will they meet with the SNP administration at Glasgow City Council and to tell them, just bluntly, to think again? Thank you.
Thank you. I call Pam Dutton-Glancy, who's joining us remotely, to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm compelled to speak today on behalf of Glaswegians like myself who will be inadvertently impacted by a charge from the SNP Council, which, although it is aimed at people living outside the city boundaries, will have an immensely negative impact on Glaswegians too. I don't envy the SNP members in this debate having to defend a policy which will have such a negative impact on their constituents' day-to-day lives, which everyone knows includes friends and family outside the city's bounds, and small businesses who will not be thrilled at another policy from the council that makes it easier to stay out of Glasgow than spend money in it. The SNP Glasgow City Council's proposals to introduce a congestion charge alongside a toll on the Clyde Tunnel is fundamentally unfair. No matter how they try to justify it, they can't take away from the essential fact that it's a tax on working people who, in the absence of reliable, affordable and 24-hour public transport, rely on their own cars to drive to and from Glasgow to work in Glaswegian businesses, homes and public services and contribute to our economy. Without these people, who the SNP would like to tax, it is Glaswegians who suffer. The SNP can pretend that this charge is to reduce congestion, but whilst public transport remains so woeful, every Glaswegian knows that this is just a money-raising scheme that they've been forced into by their own party's government underfunding them. Like people in Highland, Partick and beyond, who now have to pay an emissions charge on top of the parking permit. Even if their car is electric and emits no fumes, this congestion charge is spin at best and patronising at worst. The fact that these residents and others in the north of the city who want to use the Clyde Tunnel to get to the Queen Elizabeth to work or visit their ill relatives may have to pay another additional charge is a very sorry state for the city's residents to be in. I and many Glaswegians could not function day in, day out without people who live outside our city boundaries. Under these plans, some of the support workers who work with me and my husband every day would have to pay to come to work in the city we are proud to call home. Many commuters rely on private transport because public transport options are unreliable, costly and sometimes simply aren't available or accessible, meaning those who are least able to change how they travel and those who are most disadvantaged will be hit first. In addition, it will have major impact on businesses. The Glasgow Chamber of Commerce warns that firms may relocate unless huge improvements are made to public transport first. At a time when workers and businesses are already dealing with price rises caused by international events out with their control, the implementation of policy risks creating more of a burden, forcing customers and businesses out. The premium that Glasgow pays to maintain infrastructure, which is used by people across Scotland, isn't fair. But trying to balance this unjust allocation of money with an unjust charge is trying to correct a wrong with another wrong. What Glasgow needs is greater acknowledgement from this Scottish Government of the footfall our city attracts, reflected in greater and fairer funding settlements, so that the City Council can properly maintain and build city infrastructure that services without penalising Glaswegians. For the past 18 years, local government has been cut to the bone by the SNP, and this is the result. SNP councils starting a boundary charge war, which only ends in other councils implementing their own boundary charges, and the people of Scotland as a whole end up less connected and worse off. I urge SNP ministers talk to their SNP colleagues at Glasgow City Council about what investment they need to maintain and build thriving local services, whilst working closer with local communities, authorities and others to run with legislation that enables them to take buses into public ownership and run them for the needs and wants of the people, not profit. Expand bus networks and improve accessible, affordable travel. That must be a priority before these charges are even considered. If we want people out of cars, we must give them viable alternatives instead of unfairly penalising them. Attempting to build first rather than punish is the only way to successfully deliver climate action and social justice together, and I urge the government to do so. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Neil Bibby to be followed by Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Jackson Carlaw for securing this debate, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to outline my opposition to the proposed Glasgow congestion charge, which would be bad for my constituents and bad for Glasgow. It is a bigger thy neighbour policy which would hit those of us from the west who visit Glasgow regularly. And I would say to the SNP Council that believing in separatist politics is not an excuse that allows you to disregard the needs of your nearest neighbours. Now, the SNP and Greens at Glasgow City Council will try and hide behind the idea that they are doing this for environmental reasons, but the truth is they are not. If they were serious about reducing the number of car journeys in the city, then they would have ensured commuters in the Greater Glasgow area had access to affordable, reliable public transport, but they have not. And after nearly 2 decades of the SNP and the Greens in government for nearly 3 of them, my constituents are paying amongst the highest bus fares in the UK, and there has been no regulation of bus services. Better and cheaper bus and rail services are the best way to relieve congestion rather than fining people for going about their business. In other words, you can't propose London-style congestion charges without London-style public transport. And that takes me to the real reason for this. And everyone knows this is about raising money and the SNP Council trying to fill a £110 million black hole in its budget. A black hole caused by the SNP government's underfunding of local councils. And while I sympathise with the position that Glasgow City Council is facing, this is not the answer. Stopping this government's waste of taxpayers' money is the answer. This proposal will have a real impact on my constituents. The people I represent need help with the cost of living. But this proposal will hit the pockets of my constituents, particularly those in Renfrewshire, East Renfrewshire, Western Bartonshire and Eastern Bartonshire, just to travel into or through Glasgow. And that's before you get to the impact on places like Lanarkshire that David Russell was talking about. This could be to visit friends and family, to work, to shop or to attend medical appointments. And Jackson Carlaw in the opening talked about the centralisation of health services. Another example of that was the decision to close the RH Children's Ward in Paisley and move those services to the Royal Hospital for Children in Glasgow. So under this proposal, my constituents would be charged just to visit their sick children, and there's many, many more examples of it. They won't be alone. Hundreds of thousands of people in the Greater Glasgow area would be affected. And as we've heard, the basic rule of economics is the more you charge, the less demand there will be. So this measure would not only be bad for my constituents with the cost of living, but bad for the Glasgow businesses and the economy too. That's one of the key reasons why Glasgow City Council Labour Group have opposed this policy, and it's also why the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce have warned that they are, and I quote, very concerned about the possible displacement of business out of Glasgow. Fewer people commuting to Glasgow will damage Glasgow businesses. The damage to them will be damage to the whole region. We will all pay one way or another. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, it's clear that hard-working Scots shouldn't have to pay the price of SNP waste and failure. And like other members, I want to hear from the Scottish Government, from the Transport Secretary, whether the Transport Secretary of the Scottish Government supports this happening, whether they're going to cooperate with this happening, or whether they're going to make representations to Glasgow City Council to get this shelved, because I don't believe it's right, my constituents and businesses don't believe it's right, and I believe the SNP Council should think again. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Paul Sweeney to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the member for Eastwood for tabling this motion for members' business. And I think the issue really was summarised very succinctly by the member for Cumbernauld and Clossyth when he talked about the issue of a wider regional issue facing Glasgow. The Clyde Tunnel is an important piece of infrastructure for the entire Glasgow City region area, but it is Glasgow City Council's sole responsibility to fund and maintain it. And this is symptomatic of a bigger challenge for the Glasgow City region. It is the 4th largest metropolitan area in the UK, but with no devolution deal or elected mayor. Its governance is fragmented across at least 8 local authorities, and it has limited access to the sort of economic growth policy levers and funding that the big city regions in England now enjoy. And this current Glasgow City deal covers 8 local authorities in the city region, but it's not a statutory agreement with the accompanying powers. And when it comes to the Clyde Tunnel, this means that the Glasgow City Council shoulders the financial burden of maintaining this critical infrastructure that benefits the whole city region, but it also means that neighbouring local authorities don't have a say in how the tunnel is funded or decisions in its future. And certainly the member for Eastwood said I should rue my position on it, but I think he ought to rue his party's position 30 years ago when it vindictively dismantled Strathclyde region I believe John Major at the time described Strathclyde as an abomination. Well, I think we're now seeing the unintended consequences of that foolish, self-interested decision at the time. The current position of the Scottish Government is that the Clyde Tunnel is a local Glasgow City Council issue. I think this debate has made it clear that it isn't. And I'm sure that members across the chamber will agree that the injustice of the status quo is simply unsustainable. Glasgow City Council has had the largest cut to its budget from any local authority in Scotland, and it doesn't receive back a proportionate share of the business rates revenue generated within the city boundary. The Glasgow Roads budget has also been disproportionately cut as a consequence. The Clyde Tunnel maintenance budget now consumes 10% of the entire road maintenance budget for the city. That's 762 metres of road out of 1.8 million metres of road in the city. So 10% of the budget going on 0.04% of the road network. It's simply unsustainable. And it's actually accentuated from a social justice point of view because Glasgow has the lowest car ownership in Scotland with only 376 cars per 1,000 residents. Compare that to 678 cars per 1,000 people in Renfrewshire. So the lowest car-owning districts in the country, such as Drumchapel and Govan, have to pay for the tunnel maintenance via higher council tax rates, whilst the richest communities in Scotland with the highest car ownership, such as Bearsden and Kilmacombe, enjoy it free of charge and generally have lower council tax rates as a result. I see 4 solutions to this problem because it is unsustainable and socially unjust. Adoption of the Clyde Tunnel as a national trunk road by Transport Scotland, like the Kingston Bridge and the Erskine Bridge, but this has been repeatedly resisted by the Scottish Government, despite calls over years from myself and other MSPs for this to be pursued. Adoption of the Clyde Tunnel as a regional transport asset by the City Region Councils and co-funded via Strathclyde Partnership for Transport or a new combined authority, restoring the combined approach that existed via the Strathclyde road system from 1975 to 1996. This is not under consideration by the Scottish Government. An agreement for the Scottish Government and COSLA to provide additional funding for Glasgow to cover the £820,000 a year shortfall to maintain the road over the baseline local roads allocation. The Scottish Government's position is that this must be funded from the general budget allocation provided to Glasgow City Council. I think that's completely absurd. Or indeed, we could resort to the unilateral introduction by Glasgow City Council of a number plate recognition camera toll system, which I think is the least desirable of all the options, but it's certainly the only one available to Glasgow City Council to do. But indeed, it would require a statutory instrument and regulatory framework to be put in place in this Parliament by ministers, and no discussion has taken place between Glasgow City Council and Scottish Government so far. So there is an opportunity to do this. I think the best option, in my view, is to move to a combined authority approach for the Glasgow City region, which is long overdue and would certainly unleash a lot of potential across Glasgow and the greater Glasgow area. And I would like to see the government look at this seriously, because it's not just about the boundaries or the tunnel, it's about a whole lot of other things, as mentioned briefly in the debate.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. Thank you. You need to conclude. You're over your time. Thank you. And I now call Fulton McGregor, who is joining us remotely, up to 4 minutes max. Mr McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hadn't intended to speak initially, so thanks for allowing me in, and I'll try to be quick and less than the 4 minutes. I can also start by thanking Jackson Carlow for bringing this to the Chamber today. I represent Coatbridge and Christen in North Lanarkshire, which directly adjoins to Glasgow City. So heading into town, as the saying goes, is a major and regular part of life for people, which includes for work, study, leisure, health appointments, etc. Not often would I speak in the Chamber on a Glasgow City Council policy or decision, but this proposal, as others have said, actually directly affects my constituents. People who, incidentally, Presiding Officer, don't get a vote in Glasgow City Council elections, so they need me to speak for them. And I think, as we've heard already, they are very much against these proposals and have contacted me in fairly large numbers, folk feeling penalised for travelling to work or for leisure. And I also think there could be the unintended consequence of people in places like Lanarkshire and in my constituency feeling more negatively towards Glasgow. So I would beg the question of why the council there would want to do that. It is an amazing city with so much to offer. But I would like to remind the Chamber, as has been said, it is only a proposal just now. So please let's remember that at this moment and bring some calm to the debate that we're having. And I understand that part of the reasoning is to increase public transport use and therefore reduce congestion, but that's not always a suitable option for people. The trains are generally good in my constituency. The Cabinet Secretary will be happy to hear, and whether you use the Sunnyside, Kirkwood or Steps line, they're all pretty good at getting you in and out of the town. However, buses are a bit more hit and miss and are often unreliable for a variety of reasons, which I don't have time here to go into. But my office pick up a lot of work in this issue, particularly in the northern corridor area of my constituency, probably more so than the Coatbridge part, where the relatively new CityLink service has been a big help in picking up some of that slack. So I would urge Glasgow City Council to put the brakes on, so as to speak, on this proposal, and instead work with other local authorities like North Lanarkshire, where I am, on bettering public transport routes across the region, involving the SPT region. Paul Sweeney raised a very important point there as well on the Clyde Tunnel, and I think that's something that deserves a lot more, a wider look at. And I think that there is an argument there that we should all pay for that, but I don't think it can be done on charging people who go in and out to Glasgow. But there is maybe an argument for all the nearby local authorities to help with the paying of that, because it isn't fair for folk in Drumchapel who don't use cars to pay for the Clyde Tunnel, while folk like myself can use it without paying. So I do agree it's important to reduce car use and ease congestion on the M8. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Anybody who uses the M8 would agree with that. But this is not the way to do it. And I would also join the calls today for Glasgow City Council to think again on this issue. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms McGregor. And I now call the Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, local road user charging policy is contained in the Transport Scotland Act 2001, introduced by the then Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition administration. It's not been used since then, and neither has there been a move by any MSP, including those from the Conservative Party, to remove the option as being available under the law in Scotland if local authorities, such as Glasgow or any other local authority, choose to use it. Indeed, in opposition over 20 years ago, I campaigned against Edinburgh City Council congestion charging precisely because they hadn't engaged properly with the interests and needs of West Lothian and my constituents. Glasgow City Council has not published specific proposals. Should such proposals come forward, we would fully expect a comprehensive consultation with communities and businesses, and until that process begins, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on any particulars. I have not had any meetings with Glasgow City Council on this matter. I do know, though, they have concerns about the upkeep and investment of the Clyde Tunnel, which makes up 0.04% of their road network and requires about 10% of their annual maintenance budget to keep it operational. And Davy Russell, in his contribution, talked about previous neglect in terms of investment. I want to make progress. And of course, Jackson Carlo himself talked about how important the Clyde Tunnel is to his constituents. Now, they have previously asked, Glasgow City Council have asked Transport Scotland to adopt it as a trunk road, which was not agreed to, as it is a route which data has indicated is mostly used by traffic from the wider Glasgow area. Indeed, all members have all talked about the local nature of the tunnel. And I would suggest it is what constitutes the wider Glasgow area, which Mr Carlow would question, and that he might not want East Renfrewshire to be seen as part of that. Now, I would, however, point out that East Renfrewshire is part of Strathclyde Regional Transport Partnership and is also part of the Glasgow City Regional Growth Deal, which has transport commitments in it. And I think Paul Sweeney, in a thoughtful speech, set out some of the challenges of working in that regional aspect in relation to transport. I do want to address everybody's points if I can. Opportunities to work in Glasgow, receive health services in city hospitals, enjoy Glasgow leisure and recreation and study facilities, but to enjoy living in East Renfrewshire. And the balance of who should pay for what services has long been an issue, long before the idea of local road user charging and the Clyde Tunnel was raised. And Patrick Harvey referred to this. Jamie Hepburn raised the issue of congestion. Of course, local road user charging generally aimed at easing congestion and generating funds for transport infrastructure and public transport is not new or novel, and many cities around the world have implemented such schemes as part of broader strategies to manage car demand. Now, car use remains remains vital for Scotland, particularly given our many rural and semi-rural communities. Any policy aimed at reducing car use must recognise that reality, and that's why the draft Climate Change Plan places a strong emphasis on the switch to EV vehicles through incentives and investment in infrastructure, and we have refined our approach, and our primary target is now a 16% reduction in car emissions. Car use is currently still the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. It accounts for 38.9% of transport emissions and 12.9% of our total emissions. So we do need to tackle climate change. We do need to have public investment in public transport, and we do need to make sure that things are done on a rational basis. But I do want to talk about what needs to be done in terms of that wider context. And I am concerned about the Labour Chancellor's approach to fuel duty and also our EVP per mile proposal. I think it is the wrong decision for motorists, the wrong decision for climate and the wrong decision for Scotland. She's ignoring the need for a broader reform of motoring taxation, and we have repeatedly called on the UK Government to reform and to engage with the devolved nations on this. What is needed is a four nations approach to reform that and make sure it aligns with wider such considerations, such as climate change, investment in public transport alternatives and in road maintenance requirements. And it's vital that the Scottish Government is involved in this. Now, on the legislation that currently exists, we are conducting a regulatory check of the 2001 powers on local road user charging to ensure they remain fit for purpose. This process brings together local authorities, regional transport partnerships and key stakeholders to assess these powers collaboratively. And so local road user charging powers only apply to roads in respect to which local authorities are the traffic authority. Megan Gallagher may not be aware that the prohibition on tolls applies to bridge authorities. And of course, it was the SNP government that abolished the Conservative introduced tolls on our bridges previously. Now, it means that the authorities cannot charge for the use of trunk roads, as the Scottish Ministers are the traffic authority for those roads. And Scottish Ministers have no plans to introduce road user charging on trunk roads. In addition to today's debate, it's also about local democracy. Time and time again, the Scottish Conservatives call for greater local decision-making, yet when these very powers are placed in the hands of local authorities, they resist decentralisation. And I've always been clear, decisions that shape communities should be made by those closest to them. Local authorities must be empowered to act in the best interests of their areas and remain accountable to the people they serve. And should any authority choose to progress with a demand management scheme, we expect them to work constructively and in partnership with neighbouring councils and regional partners in this regard where needed. And Pam Goso misunderstands the law. Under the 2000 Act, any revenue raised through road user charging must be reinvested to deliver the priorities set by the relevant authority's local transport strategy. And that would ensure every pound raised supports better transport outcomes. So if Glasgow City Council or any other local authority considers using these powers, I'm sure they'll set out detail of costs and benefits and consult widely. So I would expect them to engage with neighbouring local authorities. I thank the member for enabling me to set out a number of these issues as part of this debate. I think it started with Mr Carroll's characteristic hyperbole, but he's opened up what I think is an issue that everybody has responsibility to. The move to tackle climate change, but also the move to have place-based transport planning, and I think that was set out by Mr Sweeney. So if we could use this place constructively, we can help set the conditions for that, and I think that is the manner and that is the tenor that this debate should be conducted in. But I thank the member for allowing me to set out these points in my summing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting until 2 p.m. Thank you.